Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jackson Interaction Podcast. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and we are recording this on a Sunday and hoping to get it out on Tuesday, but we'll see. Maybe sooner, maybe later. But had a little bit of difficulties with StreamYard, so please forgive us if it freezes up here and there. Last time when I was doing my interview with Tyler, we had a weird audio noise that was going on, but knock on wood, I don't hear it going on the day. So I have high hopes that we're going to have good audio. So hope the video holds up. But I digress. Let's get to our guest right now. I told everybody, we're going to be doing a series of interviews with comedians because I've been far on doing comedy this past year than I have in a long, long time. I've met a lot of interesting and fun people. And one of the more fascinating things I've found in doing comedy is comedy and professional wrestling are very similar in starting out in wrestling, starting out in comedy, the frustrations, lack of money, all that kind of thing are very, very similar. And so I've had a lot of fun talking at shows to my comedian friends about their road and how they've traveled in comedy. And I thought, why are we just doing this, backstage? Let's do it on a podcast. And so we're doing it today, and we're doing it today with Nico Brooke. How are you doing today, Nico?
Hello, I am so good. I was feeling sleepy, but then I heard that introduction music. I was like, oh my gosh.
I've had people say that sounds very familiar, and it's actually the music from the Skate or Die Nintendo game from when I was a kid. Don't tell me how I
Oh,
pull that music out of
yo.
my end, but there
It
it
sounds
is.
exactly like it would do that. No, I
that's
love that you brought up wrestling. Like, before I started stand-up comedy, I was just a big wrestling fan.
that's awesome. And I've met so many people in comedy that's the case. It's
Yeah.
it's it's funny that those two worlds parallel so much. And as I was kind of mentioning before I brought you on, getting in, I got into wrestling in 1997 and did it for several years. And then I married my first wife, and she didn't like wrestling. So I got out of wrestling for a long time. And the other thing I loved as much as wrestling was comedy. So I'm like, all right, well, I got to perform. I got this itch. I have to get in front of people for whatever reason. And so when I couldn't do wrestling, then I got into comedy.
Yeah,
And I
no.
started finding out, like, man, breaking into comedy is almost exactly like breaking into wrestling. You just got to go find these shows. You got to weasel your way onto them. You can't expect, a lot of money or hardly any. Um, and you just work your way up. And then one day you realize, like, hey, I'm doing better shows in front of better crowds, and you network. And I mean, wrestling and comedy is very similar in that. It's all about networking, about making
Yeah.
friends that can create opportunities for you, and then you create opportunities for them, and back and forth, and so on and so forth. And last week, my guest on the show was Tyler Fomby, a comedian I know you're
Hmm.
familiar with,
I love
and
that.
I actually met him through professional wrestling. Oddly enough, we
Wait,
did
what?
commentary on a show in Montgomery
Oh, that's
for a
so
mutual friend of
cool.
ours at GT South. Had a wrestling show back behind. I know the first thing, if you're thinking like, how in the world do they have wrestling in that little building? No, it was outside, behind the
Like,
building.
oh
But
my
me and him got to do
gosh.
commentary and had fun.
That's perfect. When did this happen?
This was about a month ago, 6 weeks ago. It hadn't been that long.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I'm so mad right
Eh,
now.
I know, right? And that's the thing is, I got to get Shane Mako because there's all these people that have told me since, like, if I'd have known, I'd have been there. I didn't hear about it. I'm like,
Yeah,
got
no,
to do
I
a better
didn't hear
job
about it at
advertising.
all. Oh my God, that is perfect. Yeah, I love, and I feel like both of these crafts have these super like underground scenes that you don't really notice unless you're like looking for it, and you only pay attention to like
Yes.
those big names. You're like Randy Orton, but like I didn't. I'm not even familiar with the fact that there is like an indie wrestling scene in the local area. Like that's new to me.
And there's really not, and that's kind of what my friend Shane Mako, that he typically comes up to this part of the state and wrestles with us on these shows and goes to Mississippi and whatnot. And he's from Montgomery, and he's like, we need. I mean, it was big back in the day, back in the '80s and '90s. You had the Continental Wrestling and all that. But he's like, there's not a scene down there anymore. He's like, why is nobody running down there? And I was like, well, run it. And so
It's, yeah,
that's what he did. That show was kind of the jumping off point, but he's wanting to do some more. So I'll make sure that we get ready to do it again, and maybe you can help us
please
spread the
do.
word
Yes.
and mutually beneficial. But
Yeah. Sometimes if there's a thing you want to happen, you just gotta make it happen, even though it's gruesome and takes a while and you lose money on it. You just gotta try to make cool things happen in your local area.
and a lot of times that's better because a lot of times rather than having to try to fight your way into a scene, if you create your own, you can make it what you want it to be, and people really can't squeeze you out of something you started. I mean, up here in Huntsville, my buddy Jonathan Craig that I had on the show here a few months ago. A few years back, there really wasn't a comedy scene in Huntsville, and they started a comedy scene, just running bars and restaurants and the typical coffee shops and the whole nine. And they started Epic Comedy Hour, and eventually they grew it until Stand Up Live came
Yeah,
there. And it's Huntsville's pretty
like the last time I went to
considerable comedy scene
Huntsville,
now. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a
I went and I
destination for a
saw
lot of folks.
Brian Posehn. He
Yeah,
was there. Yeah, so I went and I saw his show. And then the next day I like ran into him at this they have this like refurbished high school that is like an art gallery. Do you know what I'm talking about?
yeah. I haven't been there, but
Yeah,
I've heard quite a few people talk about it.
it's really cool. And I ran into Brian Posehn there and he was like, "Do you know where the record store is?" And I was like, "Surprisingly, I don't." But yeah,
And Brian
Huntsville's like
Posehn is one of those
super
people that
legit.
it's not like you're standing over going, "Is that Brian Posehn? I'm not sure." Like
It's like
you know him
now.
when you see him.
Like one hundo, man. And I'm so bad at like meeting famous people because I am not a vulture at all. Like I won't
Yeah,
try and get anything out of them. I will just pretend like they're the most normal person alive. And I'm
and
like,
they appreciate that because
I'm sure, but damn.
I have watched interactions with people, and I thought that has got to be so awkward for them the way this person's acting
Yeah,
right now. And I know they can't help it; they're meeting their hero or whatever. But
yeah.
oh my gosh, I can't imagine what that feels like when you're on the other side of that. It's like, hey,
Oh my
calm
God.
down. Like
And that's like
I'm
every
just a person like
interaction
you.
you
It
have.
ain't.
Yeah. Like I can't imagine being famous and you leave your house and there's just like a paparazzi. Like every time. Every time.
Yes.
That's like no peace. Oh my god.
Yeah. I don't think I'll ever have to worry about that, but
Same here though.
something to strive for, I guess. Uh, so you talked about you was a wrestling fan before you got into comedy. Were you a comedy fan all your life? Like, where do you
You
kind of
know,
remember your fandom of comedy starting, where it became more than something you watched?
so I've always been a really big fan of like funny things. Like I always hung out with funny people and played like Dungeons and Dragons and always just like doing just goofy stuff and generally
Right.
wanting to make people laugh. But I wasn't a stand-up comedy fan in my teenage years. I think I just didn't acknowledge the existence of it very well. Like I hadn't really
Right.
been exposed to it. So it's something I started to discover more so in my early 20s. And I feel like I'm catching up on all my stand-up comedy knowledge, to be honest. Like
Right.
I do it and I love it, but there's so many like original, like classic people that I really need to look back on and get to know better. But
Right.
yeah, it kind of came out of nowhere for me.
Is there anyone in particular that kind of made you take notice of stand up? Like, oh, that's what this is. Oh, this is kind of cool.
Maria Bamford.
There you go.
Yeah, I just think she's so unique and authentic, and the trope she's doing, it seems like something that could be so fake and be like, oh, my mental illness is funny, but she's like so real and just like genuinely
Yeah.
telling about herself and her story and experiences in this way that feels so genuine, and it's like contrived in the way that it's like detail oriented, but it's not fake. Like
Right.
that's her. I don't know.
To me, that's one of the most unique and fun things about stand up comedy is there's there's not one way to do it. There's not like a right way. I mean, I know if you go
Yeah.
back in history and look when the big comedy boom happened, there was a ton of comedians that all looked, sounded, and acted very similar, and it kind of became a uniform. And there's people that'll tell you there's certain rules in stand up you have to follow, and your structure has to be this way and all that.
No shorts on
But it's
stage.
there's people who completely break that mold and really catch on, and I think that's what draws people to them. It's a different viewpoint, it's a different presentation, and I think that's what's fun about comedy is if you get up there and whatever it is you do makes the people laugh and they want to come see you, then the rules have changed. Then if it doesn't follow the rules, then you just changed them. You made it. You made your own, and
Exactly.
that's fun.
It's like constantly evolving because I just feel like the performing arts just has so much life to it, like wrestling as well. It's just like this living, like growing thing that you get to toy with and just change up, and it's beautiful. Yeah.
It really is. And so, how did you break into comedy? Like, what do you remember? What your first show was and how it came about?
One of my childhood friends started doing comedy, and he did it at this place called Fat Daddy's in Auburn, Alabama. And so I decided to go out one night, and I didn't do a set that night, but a couple months down the road, I came back on a random Monday and I did a set, and I did so terrible. And then I kept doing it every Monday until I was the host of the show for 2 years.
Oh
So,
wow,
yeah.
nice.
So I stumbled into it because my friend was doing it. Honestly, like it wasn't a super purposeful venture, but once I was there, I was like, oh my gosh, I really enjoy this and want to learn more. It felt so new and just like a good fit. Yeah.
Right. So when you were preparing for that first time you were going to go up, what I mean, and you're just I mean, like when you're new, you're just figuring out. I'm sure you talked to your friend that was doing it, but what was your process then to prepare for that first time you went up?
I had no process. I was just 21 and impulsive. So I was working at this shady hotel at the time. I was working graveyards as the night auditor. So I just got up and told stories about that, to be honest.
Right.
Literally no preparation. Just didn't care. Which is beautiful for your first time, right? Because
Yes.
I don't know if you get on the stand up Reddit, but it's like a million people that are like, I've been writing a set for 6 years and I still haven't done an open mic yet. And it's like,
Yes.
yo, just do it. Like, just get it over with. Just be
I
willing to make
marvel at that
mistakes.
that stand up. Like you say, there's people that have been writing jokes their whole life. They're having these long, thoughtful conversations about the 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 theories of it and this and that. And they're like, "Well, how long have you been doing it?" Well, I've been doing. I mean, I haven't actually got on stage yet, but I mean, I've been doing it for 12 years. I'm like, what do you like?
Yeah,
There's
no.
people that call themselves a comedian. They've never actually been on stage. And I'm like, then what makes
Yeah.
you like? What?
Oh,
It's
it's
crazy.
fascinating. Like the cognitive dissonance of it is just it's bizarre. And that's so much of that Reddit. Honestly, if you have like a good stand-up comedy Reddit, please let me know because I'm so tired of looking at that thing. It's like I bombed at an open mic my second time. I think I'm gonna quit. And it's like, yo, that's
Yes.
some
And then
commitment.
I did 4 minutes on my back porch in front of my neighbors. Watch this and tell me what you think.
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
I've been doing this off and on since 2006, and I don't really post anything online just so I don't burn any material right now. And these people, the minute they perform anywhere, they're posting it everywhere they possibly can. Like,
Yeah.
please give me your honest feedback, and then people roast them, and then they're like, "I just started. Why are you so mean?" Like,
Yo, I think that's like such an interesting thing to have to balance in this very like digital centric era of like I don't want to post my material because I don't want to burn it and put it out there in a way where it could be like pretty much ripped off because face it, that could happen. But also I don't want to talk about Bo Burnham too much, but having that like digital presence makes you seem so much more legitimate for some
Yeah.
reason. And I think it's unfortunate that we're at that point, but like, what is the balance between, yeah, don't put yourself so much out there that you're exposing everything you do and all your materials on the table, but also trying to build that digital piece? It's probably
Yeah.
worth doing.
And I've got to start right now. It's just a matter of I don't ever have anybody there to record my sets or anything. But also,
Yeah.
like I say, I mean, I've leaned more into wrestling than comedy. I mean, I would do comedy sporadically, but like I've been doing it consistently for a couple years now, and I've watched how bits that I thought were really good 2 years ago have evolved up until last weekend. And I think, man, if that was out there a year ago and people saw that, then they come see me live like, oh, that's way better. Why did he put that online? It's way better now. Why did he put that out there? So I guess burning it's not really the right phrase because that makes it sound like somebody's either going to steal it or, oh, I can't do it now. People have seen it. But I don't want to put it out there before it's ready. But then also that thing of, you put all this material out there and you've only got so much and you're like, hey, come see me this weekend. And then they get there and like, I saw all this on YouTube. Like,
Yeah, no, totally. Like,
why am I paying to see what I saw you do for free on YouTube? So
yeah, no. It's like that
it's
tease. It's the art of tease, you know? And I think that's a good point of not wanting to put a joke out there before it's like fully fleshed out because with, the internet, it's permanent, you know? It's one
yeah.
thing to go up at an open mic and be like, I'm trying out this bit and just like fumble your way through it. But then if it's just like out there forever, and
I mean,
I
I've got an open mic I did in Birmingham in 2007 that's on YouTube and it's still out there. And I'll invite somebody to see stand up. And they're like, oh, I saw your stand up. Like, that was the second time I had ever done it. And it
oh my
wasn't
god.
bad. I mean, I got laughs, but
No, I feel you
geez, it's not him now.
completely. I think like just having to not burn opportunities when you're a completely new comic. I've only been doing this for 5 years, so I'm not like super experienced in the grand scheme of stand-up, right? But like in
Right.
those first couple years when you're really, really cutting your teeth, it's so easy to burn opportunities and just
Yeah.
leave a bad impression with more experienced comics. And like ultimately, I think they understand that you can grow and learn, but it takes a lot more to prove yourself after you've bombed in front of somebody that way.
Oh yeah, that old, it's hard to get a second chance to make a first impression thing is real.
It
And
is.
and that's like the biggest piece of advice. Like, I want to try to weave if there's anybody who's like a new comic who's watching these interviews just for insight, I'm going to try to weave this into every interview, even if it doesn't even fit in the conversation at the moment, is don't put the cart in front of the horse. Like I see so many people who, before they really even have any material or before they've really been on stage, kind of like the people we were talking about on Reddit, like they will get a YouTube channel and a Twitter and a Facebook and a Joe Bob comedian, and that's in their title, and it's in their, and
Yeah.
then they promote the heck out of themselves better than I can, and they're all over the place, and it's like, all right, well now I got to write some material and get some bookings, like
No, that's
okay, and
fascinating.
you're gonna have all these eyes on you, and you're gonna put up your first set in front of all this crowd you've built, which I mean, good on you for getting those people together, and that's going to be their first and lasting impression. Because I mean, I know that in like wrestling, especially like somebody sees somebody in their first few matches and they're terrible because everybody is in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I'll try to get the person booked like 5 years later. I'm like, hey, have you seen so and so? Like my buddy that runs the show, like, oh yeah, I seen him. He's awful. I'm like, when did you see him? I'm like, it's been a few years ago. I'm like, he's gotten a lot better. I mean, that was like his fourth
Yeah.
match. And comedy's the same exact way because I would hate to try to get booked off my stand up that's my open mic that's floating around on YouTube out there right
For
now.
sure.
And
I've
there's
literally
somebody
like
somewhere that's like Gene Jackson. Like, no, I don't know. We're not booking him, So it's don't like. There is definitely a process to get material, get comfortable on stage, get good at it, and once you're kind of comfortable and you want people to see you and you want to make up their opportunities, then start putting yourself out there.
Definitely. Like, it's okay to do things slowly. I think generally we can be impatient just as like human beings and be like, oh my God,
Yes.
I found this thing that I really want to do, and now I got to put all of my everything into it right now, or otherwise I'm not an artist or whatever. And it just comes out of this like desperation instead of just looking at something and being like, maybe I can slowly build a foundation that grows over the years, you know?
Right.
Uh,
I've got friends like that where it's like they have no inclination of something, and then there's somebody gets wild. They're like, "Hey, have you ever thought about, you know, riding a dirt bike?" And they're like, they're a dirt bike racer the next weekend. They've got everything they need, and that's what they do. And it's on their Facebook, dirt bike racer. Like,
yeah,
okay,
and
you
it's
can't
like,
go from you've never been on a dirt bike to now you're a dirt bike racer, and this is your livelihood now. Like,
for
come on,
sure.
you got to crawl before you go take off running, or jump on a
I
motorcycle for that matter.
It's like hard because I feel like we're constantly trying to find things to like identify with and like define ourselves by. And I feel people do that with comedy an awful lot, where they're like 3 months in, but they're already acting like this tortured comic. And they're like, I'm so depressed because I'm a comedian. And I'm like, yo, just go get some fresh air, man. It's gonna be okay.
I've run into people like that where, like you say, they're really deep into it, and I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, man, they've been doing this for years. Like, how long have you been doing it? Like, oh man, like dude, I've been this like was it like 9 months or so? I'm going to say 9 years, like not 9 months. Like, what are you talking about? Like, calm
Like, what's
down.
happening? Yeah, no.
Because they'll be like, I'm just not getting opportunities, man. I just can't get bookings, and I don't know why I can't get out there. And I'm like, okay, well, how long have you been doing it? Oh, about, I mean, it's been like 8 or 9 months now, and I'm just not getting.
It's just not coming through for me. I think I should get that. I think I should go post on the stand-up comedy Reddit about this.
Yes, that needs to just be my advice for everybody. Like, if you want to meet some like-minded people, get on the stand-up comedy Reddit, and then y'all can all just sit and complain about how far behind you are in the comedy world, and
And
be
roast
your
each other's sets.
support system. Because I don't have the energy for it myself.
Nah, it gets exhausting. It does. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of just like trust in yourself that I think you have to earn your own trust in a way to be like,
Yes,
all right, I probably won't bomb. Ugh.
it it's so hard. Like, I was lucky. Like the first few times I went up, even that video that I keep referring to, like I got laughs, and so I was a few shows in, and I thought, I got this. Like, all this talk about you have to bomb. Like, I don't have to bomb. I'm not going to bomb. And then I go up on stage at the Stardome on their open mic night, and just completely crash and burn.
Oh
Like,
no.
nothing's working, and it's material that had worked the month before. And it's like, and so that's when I had to take a step back and started realizing, like, okay, like that this is part of the struggle in comedy is different crowds are going to react to material differently. Like, what one crowd eats up, this one over here, not interested in that for whatever reason. Like, you got to have some variety. Like, I can't put all my eggs in one basket. Go, this is my set, and this is what I'm
For
going to come do.
sure.
Y'all can like it, or it's going to be a long night. Like, you got to get some variety, and then when you get out there, like, oh, okay, well, this isn't working. Let's try this. Let's try that. Like, you got to be versatile.
Yeah, you do. And it's like just finding kind of like survival techniques for when a joke does just go completely flat of like, how do I gain this momentum back? Like, what's some quick little easy thing I can say while I shift like the mood and the
Yes.
material I'm about to be telling them? Because obviously that prior thing didn't work. But just having that like solid foundation you build is nice to fall back on. Just learning to abandon it when it's not going
Yeah.
well.
I mean, there's things like we were just talking about, though. Like, you only can learn that with time and repetition. Like, that's
Yeah.
not anything you can get taught or anything you can, okay, well, I read 6 books. Now I'm going to be prepared for this when I go on stage. That's stuff that you just have to go out there and it happens. You react like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't the right reaction. Well, next time, let me. And it's really hard when it's material that you've done numerous times and it's always worked. And now all of a sudden it's just silence. You're like, because
Yeah.
usually, most of us, your act builds like, okay, well, this joke hits like this, which builds to this, which builds to this, which builds to this. But when this first one bombs, you're like, oh crap, if that one didn't work, this one really ain't going to work, and that one really ain't going to work. Or how can I now make that work? Like, what did I not hit over here? It's so funny to me because like people who have never done comedy and just watch it are just like, oh, you just go up there and be funny. I was like, that is so not.
No.
It doesn't. That's nothing close to what this is. And you
Oh,
try to explain
comedy
it to
is
them, they're just
just
like, sounds like you're making it hard. Like, okay, well, go do it, buddy. Just go
right.
do it.
And it's so weird because it does seem like one of those skills that we just innately have as humans to be like, oh, just go be funny. You know how to make people laugh. Just go do it. And so it's unlike other performing arts in the way that music is like, okay, you need to learn how to play a guitar. You weren't born being able to do this. And now you're going to have to discipline yourself and really practice the guitar. And then you're a musician. And with comedy, it's more like, oh, you know how to be funny. Just go do it. It's just, it's so
And it's funny to watch those really super arrogant ones. Like, I'm the funniest guy at the plant I work at, and I
yeah,
kill at the family reunion. Like, okay, great. You know what those people's sense of humors are. Like, go out
right.
here in front of a bunch of strangers and try it. And usually they'll luck up the first couple times, but man, when they do finally bomb, like it's just it destroys them. Like, you know what I mean? Like it, and I mean I get it because I mean it's rough because comedy, like stand up comedy, it's just you. It's not a team sport. So
Yeah.
when they reject your material, and I mean you feel like they're rejecting you. Like I prepared all this and I thought this was going to make you laugh, and you just stared a hole through me like I was a piece of crap.
Yeah.
Like it's hard not to
No.
take that personal. I guess, and if you ride by yourself, it's a long ride home. You're like, man, that
Yes.
sucked. Like I don't ever want to feel like that again. Like what? Like because I mean, right now, I mean, this isn't how I make my living. You know, I have a 9 to 5. So I mean, I do this as a hobby. I would love for it one day to be my living, but you know, you start like on that ride home, you're like, why am I subjecting myself to this? Like
I
I could have
know.
done something fun tonight. Like I could
I
have hung out with
know.
my
I
friends or my
know.
wife or something. Like this
Yeah.
sucked.
I think
I've
about
quit
that
comedy a
so
lot
much.
since 2006. I can promise you. And then
It's
by the
hard
next
to
morning, you
not
wake up and
quit.
you're like, I think I know a spin I can put on that and then make it work next time. I know where I went wrong. And then by the next weekend, you're ready to go again.
It's like a weird addiction, I swear. Like when it makes you feel really good, it's so good. And when it makes you feel bad, it okay, well it used to get me super down. I think I've finally developed the skin for it, but also when something goes well now, I'm not as excited as I was when I was
Right.
super, super new to it.
Yeah.
So it's like you
And now
just
you're
get
just like, that's what's
desensitized on
supposed to
both
happen.
ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, that's the bare minimum.
I used to never understand why people would stay in abusive relationships. And I'd just be like, why don't you get out? Why are you staying? And then now I'm like, okay, I kind of,
Yeah,
I kind
like
of understand.
totally.
Like I've been in an abusive relationship with comedy and wrestling for years now, and I haven't left. So,
No, I imagine wrestling is the same in that way. Like
oh,
when it
very
goes
much so.
really bad, I don't think I've personally seen like a bad amateur wrestling match, but I can only imagine what that looks like.
Yeah,
Like just
it's
fish like flopping around is what I'm imagining.
that's pretty accurate. That's that's pretty close. So you mentioned, you know, you eventually moved into hosting the shows, and so for people who are just starting out or maybe haven't experienced that, kind of describe the difference between just like I book you, like I have a show, I book you, like, hey Nico, I want you to come perform on my show. You've got 15 minutes, and the difference between hey Nico, I want you to come host my show. Like, how does that differentiate being the host and just being someone on the show?
Okay, so the difference between being just a comic that somebody reaches out to and is like, "Hey, come do comedy here," opposed to being that person
Yes,
that's reaching
the
out like, oh my God, it's hosting and producing shows is I love it. It's so fulfilling, but it is a logistical headache. Like to figure out the when and the where and then get the flyer and start promoting in the right way and finding a venue that actually likes what you're doing. Like it is a constant uphill battle while the other side has a different sort of responsibility, right? Because if you're being booked on a
right.
show, it's like, okay, I'm probably doing a longer set and I need to like really hone in on my material and be practicing at open mics the days before. While if you're just hosting a show, you don't have to worry too much about like, I got to do 30, right? It's
Right.
like, I got to,
Right.
but it's hard in the way that you're the first person setting the tone. And so you
Yes.
really have to learn how to bring your own energy into whatever you are doing. Because I booked somebody who has been on Comedy Central, right? And I showed up to the bar. There were no cars in the parking lot. And it's like, at that point, you can't do anything. And you can look back and say, well, I should have promoted in this way. I should have booked this person to go on with this person, and all these things you can say in hindsight. But in that
Right.
moment, you're just like, oh my God, I am screwed. And eventually, like, people did like show up, and that night was fine. But I've hosted open mics with zero signups, and
That's rough.
it sucks so much. And then you have to look at the owner in the eye and be like, yeah, so I thought I could do this thing, but apparently I can't. As
Right.
it's out of your control as to whether or not people show up for open mics, and I've had people cancel the day of shows. So
Yeah.
I definitely think producing shows is a great way to start putting yourself out there with comedy. And it's how I basically got started, is I started hosting a whole bunch. But it works a whole different skill set.
It's
So
very stressful. Like, are you able to still have fun and enjoy what you're doing with all that going on around your head?
I can now, but it's something that I had to learn how to do
Yeah.
because once you're when you're new at it, you're not used to all those stressors, and you have to really be deliberate, like what do I need to do? And then once you do it enough, you start just subconsciously knowing like what has to happen, and you get into a rhythm like you would with any other job. But yeah,
Right.
at the outset, like so stressful, and I would constantly just be like, why am I doing this? Like, and at
Yeah.
the end of the night, I would feel great and feel so joyful and just like really fulfilled by it. But leading up to it, like looking at like ticket sales and just being like, oh my God, nothing's going right and I can't do anything to change it. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Like,
really,
not to keep bringing things back to wrestling, but that's where a majority of my experience is. But for years, like since I was a kid, since I was a small child, writing down matches and playing them out with my LJ wrestling figures as a small child. I had always wanted to book my own shows, and so finally, a few years back, I got the opportunity to run my own wrestling shows, and it was the most miserable experience of my life. I hated every minute
oh,
of it. I did. I
I
mean, I
imagine.
hated every
I imagine. I
every.
understand.
I hated every single solitary second of it. I ran uh, three shows altogether and swore I would never ever do it again, or I was going to hate the business and not ever take part in it again. But the one of the things, and I want to see if this is something you experience booking comedy shows, is so the first show I did over in Piedmont, Alabama. It's a venue that runs wrestling every Friday night. They've had a show there for years, and I was going to run it on a Sunday. And people were like, it may work on a Sunday, it may not, I don't know. But he was giving me a really good deal on the building. All I had to do was show up and turn the key. I didn't have to rent a ring. I didn't have to rent a sound system. It was all right there. So show up on Sunday afternoon, turn the key, go in, have my show, and leave. I was like, this is perfect scenario.
Yeah.
And as soon as I put it out there, I was doing a show. I get bombarded every day with wrestlers from the tip of Florida up to Washington D.C. wanting to come do this little show in Alabama. And it's so funny because you can tell people had their prepared email, because they'd be like, I've heard so many wonderful things about your show and how respected you are as a promoter. And I'm like, this is my first show, dude. Like, like, alter your email, your form email. Um, and so, then you're trying to decide, who to use, and go and look and say, does this person, because they would give you this resume. But like, okay, do you have any video I can watch? Is there anything? And it
Yeah.
was just that in itself was just because then you go, well, hey, I've already got the show booked. I've got my budget set. Oh, I'll come work for free. I'm like, I don't have any more room. I can only have so many matches,
It's only so much
and
time.
just people begging. And then I was notorious. My friends still make fun of me this day that I would end up way overbooking the shows because I had a hard time saying no to people. And as you mentioned before, wrestlers are far more notorious than comedians about king day of the show. So in my mind, it's like, all right, well, overbook it. Half the card's going to cancel away, but then I'll hopefully still have enough people to do the show. Well, this show, everybody showed up, and so it was ridiculous. But we drew a really good crowd. It was sponsored by the company I worked for at the time. It was a successful show, and after it was over, people were like, "When are you doing your next one?" I'm like, "Never." Never, ever,
This is
ever.
so
Like, I have
stressful.
been
Yeah.
miserable for 6 weeks. I have
Yeah.
prayed about the day this would be over with, and I'm so
Yeah.
happy it's over.
Oh
But
my
for you,
gosh.
like, do you get approached? Like, do you get contacted by a lot of comedians? And for people that you don't know, like, your process for kind of deciding who gets picked and who doesn't, and
So I definitely I get approached a lot. I would not say I get approached to the extent that you're expressing right now. I think
right,
wrestling may be even more niche than comedy, probably because it's so hard to get in physical well enough shape to actually wrestle anyone. And it's pretty
right,
easy to get drunk and get on a stage. Like, to be good at it, totally different thing. But the entry
true,
point, way easier.
yeah,
But yeah, I do get approached by people, and my vetting process, it entirely depends on what kind of show I'm running, right? Because, like, when I ran open mics, I wasn't super picky if somebody just wanted to come close out the open mic,
yeah,
right? Like, and I would promote it as, oh, this comedian from out of state is coming to close it out. And I didn't really, it wasn't that dire if they weren't the best in the world. But I'd
right,
always like to see people's videos. But then when it comes to these bigger shows I've been doing with like the tickets and everything, they're pretty much people I've just met over the years, and I know through word of mouth that they're legitimate and they just have like a very solid base and the following on Instagram or whatever, like it's not entirely digital based, but
yes,
yeah, so a lot of it is just word of mouth, but if somebody reaches out to me, I like to see a video, you know.
right.
Yeah.
And that's why I need to get some stuff recorded because, like, right now I don't have anything good to send anybody. I mean, only thing I can do is like, hey, do you know this guy? Ask him. You know her? Ask her. And it's really strictly word of mouth. And I'm like, nah, I need some proof to show show people, that. Um, and actually, I got some footage, but I really can't use it because there was like 6 people in the crowd. But a guy that you worked with
What?
recently, that me and Fombi were talking about, Dan Alton,
Dan Alton.
Alton, I should say.
Yes.
I did 2 shows with him a few weekends back. It was actually, I guess, the night after he had been down there, and he actually recorded the first night or the second night. I don't remember which. Or no, he actually recorded. Never mind. I'm telling a lie. He recorded both, and then about a week
Hmm.
later, he reached out and he's like, "Hey, do you want this footage?" I'm like,
Oh.
just for learning purposes. Like, I'm not going to share it anywhere because there's 6 people in the crowd, and it was, it's
Wait,
going to
what
look
show
bad.
was this? Was this
This
in
was in
Montgomery?
Anniston at
Aniston. Okay.
Happy Hour Comp Club,
Yeah,
and
I've
it is
heard about
such,
Happy
and that's
Hour.
where I have. I was gonna say I've been a regular there for a year and a half or whatever it's been, and it's a great, like, I can go get on stage like any time they're open. I can go get on stage there. Like, the owner,
Nice.
he's a good guy, and I can go anytime I want. But man, it's so hit or miss. Like, you'll go one weekend, be packed, and then you go on a weekend like that, and Dan's got a good following, and they had another performer there that's got 1 million followers on TikTok and all this
Oh
kind
my
of stuff.
gosh.
And then we
Jeez.
had 6 people the one night and like 8 people the next night. It was terrible. And we have actually gone up where we've had more comics than like audience members. Like, we
Oh,
performed in front of
definitely.
like a 70-year-old couple one night. And I was like, so Flint, we're not doing the show, right? He's like, oh, we're doing the show. They've already paid. They're eating their dinner. Like, so it
It's
was
happening.
me. It was me and my character, because I do it as Gene, and I also have this other character that I do it as sometimes too, which is a whole other story. We won't even go into all that. But so it's a 70 something year old African American couple that was there on their anniversary, and they have Whitey Jenkins, which is this redneck comedy character that I do, and the guy who was the headliner was a gentleman called Mr. Inappropriate from Atlanta, who's his whole thing is just vulgar. I mean, he's a good comic, but not really these people's cup of tea. Clearly, they didn't like ask who's performing; they just showed up. And so I went up and did like 10 minutes of it. Pretty much was just me just kind of going back and forth with them, and I was trying to have some fun with them. And then the guy behind me come up and he just started doing Mr. Inappropriate's act, and like I told Flynn, like, man, I got like this is painful. Like I can't watch. I gotta go. Like I don't even want to see how this plays us out. And
Oh,
apparently he did his full like 45 minute act in front of this one couple.
oh my
And on one hand, I
God.
wish I'd have stayed and recorded it just to be like to say that I witnessed it. You know how it was like a social experiment or something.
Yo,
But
that's the one thing with comedy is watching somebody bomb the secondhand. I don't even know if it's secondhand embarrassment, but just secondhand pain for them as you're watching them just eat shit. And
yes,
I feel like some people don't like stand-up comedy on that premise alone, right? Because I will like bring my friends out to open mics, haha, very nice friend thing to do. And if somebody is just like bombing, they're like, this is too painful to me. Like, why do you come to these events? You know? Like they can't take seeing that. And I used to get so uncomfortable too. And now I'm just like, yeah, they're fine. Like, yeah, whatever.
it's a learning experience. It's good for
Yeah,
them, you know. But it
yeah,
is. You feel it on a different level. You know, like you're like, whew.
yeah.
And there's sometimes, and this is amazing, and it's very rare, but every once in a while that starts to happen, and you're like, are they going to be able to dig themselves out? And sometimes they do, and it's like
Oh, and it's
watching a
magical.
miracle happen in front of your eyes. You're like, oh my gosh, they got them back. Like,
Yeah, it's like, all right. And then you feel like you've learned so much from this person that, like, just 5 minutes before seemed like the saddest person in the room. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's
because
just
I was sitting there thinking, like,
amazing.
yeah, I would be pulling the parachute right now. Like, I would be just shutting down. Let's wrap this up. I was supposed to do 15. We're doing 7, and
And
then
it's
they
like,
pulled it back out, and you're like, well, there's a lesson to be learned there. Maybe
there
it's not, all is
is.
not lost. Maybe if you stay the course and make some adjustments, you can
You
pull the
can
nose
keep
back up.
going. Yeah,
But
you
it's
don't have to
rare.
go full tilt.
It's very rare, though.
It is, and I think it's something you slowly get better at. And when I hosted open mics and people bombed, it would make me feel like such a control freak. Like I would have to like rein myself in so much and be like, okay, just let them keep going, like don't shorten their set or whatever. This is what open mics are for, is like
Yeah,
people just cutting their teeth and just being bad at this thing like you are. You know, like I'm not
yeah.
great at this yet. I'm still practicing. But then when you're in charge of it and just like having to rein yourself in and be like, okay, just grin and bear it. They're trying. Like it's
And
hard.
people, I mean, people usually lower their expectations for an open mic. Most people understand what that means.
But
But this is something else I'd like to get your perspective on is like hosting just a regular show. You know, you talked about how, as the host, it is difficult when you're the first person to walk out on that stage. You know, so you're setting the tone. You've got to get that ball rolling, get a little momentum going. So when that first person comes up, you know they're walking into something. But also as that host, when someone comes up there and does just completely eat shit and just runs this thing all the way off in the ditch, now you've got to come up there and you've got to steer it back out of the ditch and get a little momentum built back up so this next person isn't walking into, just, they got a fighting chance to at least, get back in the game.
I would love to say that I'm like so good at like rebuilding the momentum once somebody has shattered it and that like I know exactly what jokes to make and what to say, but it's hard. And sometimes
Yeah.
I can do it. Like I remember being able to do it in the past at times, and then I remember other moments where it just felt like such a lost cause, right? Especially when you've like
Yeah.
expended so much energy to organize this thing in the first place and then set it in the right tone, and then somebody comes in and they just ruin it. You're just like, all right, I give up. I relinquish myself to the universe. No more comedy. And it's difficult. I think it's just about really knowing yourself and really trusting yourself and just doing it a whole bunch.
Yes. Um, you kind of mentioned this earlier, so I think I already kind of know what your take's going to be, but I kind of want to hear you say it for validation because I've had this argument with some bookers. Is I've always felt if you're putting a show together that you want to try to line up like-minded comedians who, I mean, sense of humor is along the same line. They're kind of, similar, and so they'll attract kind of the same crowd, and that same crowd is going to enjoy them across the board. But I know a couple people that book shows that will put four of the most polar opposite, completely different kind of comics on the lineup together because in their mind they say, well, you're offering variety and you can draw all these different types of people in. And I guess there's something to be said for that, but odds are they're going to enjoy one portion of the show when their person goes up. And then for the rest of the show, when these other three, that's not their cup of tea, and we know they're not their cup of tea, they're they're not going to enjoy it. And are you really going to want to come back to that? To where like, well, there was 15 minutes that was really fun,
Yeah.
and the other 45 was, I could have been somewhere else. So, what do you feel like that? You need to kind of, I mean, I know every comic has their own uniqueness to them, but we all know there's a similar, you can have comics that are kind of the same similar style or sense of humor or whatever,
Yeah.
however you want to put that. More so than you're booking Sam Kinison and Jerry Seinfeld. You know, it's kind of two
uh,
different audiences.
this is such a good question, and I think it depends so much on context. Like, okay, let's say there's like a really well established comedy place that I'm gonna take over as the host for, and I gotta put together a bill for it. But like the people who go there are kind of already established, like there's already, you kind of know the vibe of the room, right? Like,
Right.
okay, yeah, stack the show catering to what you already know about that room. But then I personally, I work at a lot of places that have never had stand up before. And so when I create those bills, I do make them more well rounded and versatile, because I literally don't know what these people are going to want.
Right.
And like being able to have that variety out there to see what is hitting and then improve based off of that, and like you can kind of get a vague idea, right? Being like,
Yeah.
okay, this restaurant and wherever is going to have this, but like I also just I like taking chances. I like
Yeah.
booking the people that I want to book because I believe in what they have to say, and I just if it doesn't turn out well because I didn't book them at the right place, then that's like a chance we're both kind of taken together, you know? I don't know. It just depends so much on the context, I think.
Is that something? I mean, and I'm not asking for a name of anybody. I don't want to bury anybody, but is there been some instances maybe where you booked a comic that you really enjoy, that you have a lot of faith in, and then it turned out this just wasn't their venue or their crowd, and it didn't go well, and you felt bad for the person because, like, I mean, because you booked them and they're funny, but this wasn't their night, wasn't their place.
Okay, I've definitely have seen that happen with some of my favorite comics, and I've been fortunate enough so far that with the bigger shows I've been booking have all gone pretty well, but some of the open mics
Oh
I've
yeah, I mean
had,
that's
like, yeah, no, definitely, like where I've asked like bigger names to come close out the open mic so we get more publicity. But like they kind of expect that an open mic could be like that, right? So
yeah.
it's different than booking a sure enough bill and having it fall through. And when I have that experience, I'll get back to you because I'm sure it will not be fun.
Well, it's good to hear that you haven't experienced it because
Yeah, not yet, not yet. We'll get there. We'll get there.
so what's your goal in comedy? I mean, do you want to just keep building and hosting and producing bigger shows and focus on that, or do you want to eventually get to a point where you're focusing more on the performance side of getting out onto other and bigger shows, or moving, beyond your area and getting out and about, or is it more for you about building the production side of it and producing shows more than the performance side?
So I'm split in just like a couple of different ways because I do like have a heavy love for just like production based things, like super into just like videography and just like putting together little flyers and just like that behind the scenes work. But also I love the community based aspect of fostering a local performing arts scene. Like I
Yeah,
am obsessed with like that grassroots idea of just like building a thing from nothing and like bringing people together in that way. But then third point, I want to travel and I want to do comedy while I travel. So I think ultimately I'm using this to build like a very sturdy foundation for myself, like where I'm
yeah,
building these connections and putting my name out there, putting my face out there, and all this stuff you got to do for comedy. And then that gives me sort of a bridge to start booking out of state and booking legitimate shows for myself, if that kind of
yes.
makes sense. So
It
that's
absolutely makes
yeah,
sense.
I'm just like using it to serve a bigger idea. And while I'm doing this, it still feels super meaningful and communal. But yeah, I wanna do other things.
Well, that works on a couple levels because, like I said, from the uh, networking side of things, you get to meet and know so many people, and so many people are reaching out to you and
Yeah,
want to work with you. So that's good. But something else that you kind of mentioned earlier, maybe indirectly, it helps you on the performance side, all this hosting, because you've got to perform as a host. Like you said, you're
yeah,
worried about all these things, getting everybody there, the venue, da 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 da, and you don't think a lot about what you're going to go up there and say. You're not practicing and you're not doing all this, but you're getting up there performing. But it kind of
yeah.
takes away that performance anxiety because that's so far down the list of things you're worried about that day. It's like, is
Yes.
he? They're here. They're here. We got everybody's in the building. We got those. Oh shit! I got to go out there and I got to go out there and do my thing. And then you just kind of go out there and you do it, and it
Yeah,
becomes a second nature to you.
it
And so I
does.
think that's really beneficial. I mean, it's a hard road to travel. Don't get me wrong, like I said, because of all the stress that goes with it. But at the same time, it gives you such an opportunity to perform at a different level, as far as not being so focused on the performance aspect of it and getting to
Yeah.
do all this networking. So I think that's an ingenious way to go about it. And
Thank you.
if I wasn't such a lazy person, I would probably do much the same. But
It's so
I'm
hard.
afraid that as much as I hated promoting wrestling, I'm afraid I would hate promoting comedy just as much, and would probably be like, nah, it's not for me. So
I
I've come so close to putting a show together. I mean, I've had it in the back of my mind. I've started kind of talking to people indirectly about it, and then when it come time to start doing it, I'm like, you're going to regret this, Gene. Don't do it. Just do your little podcasts and go perform. And and I mean, honestly, cards on the table. I mean, that's a lot of the reason I started. I'm bringing comedians on this podcast because all right, when me and you get off here today, you don't know if I'm worth a shit on stage or not, but you know who I am, and you know I'm not
Yeah,
a terrible guy. You may if I hit you up, a few months from now, like, hey, if you ever got a spot for me, here's a video. I finally recorded some stuff. At least I'm not just a total stranger hitting you up. You kind of know who I am at this point.
totally.
And
Like
now I
that's
know Fombi down
also,
there who knows you. And I mean, so
yeah,
I thought, well, this is the best way for me to network and do this and to get in the head of other people and see just like this. Like I see what you're doing. I may not go run, but I see the aspects of this as working. And so that's beyond just I enjoy conversating and learning about people's journey in comedy. On the selfish side, it's also to network and
yeah,
people to learn who I am and I learn who they are. And
yeah.
if it helps me out, great. And if not, if people watch this and they learn something, then that's a plus. I don't see a downside to it, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like, and I think that's also an ingenious way to like put yourself out there and like build those connections the way that I do with hosting. And in the meantime, like things can be for a multitude of reasons, right? Like you
Yes.
can want to build connections so maybe you have opportunities further down the line, but that doesn't mean you don't genuinely enjoy where you're at right now, right? Like
Yeah.
you enjoy your podcast and I kind of enjoy hosting shows. Okay, I enjoy hosting shows. Organizing shows. It's very stressful. But
Yeah.
yeah, and it all just serves this like bigger purpose. That's cool how just like the little parts connect to make some big thing. Yeah.
I mean, it does. I mean, it's weird. It's like I didn't know when I rode down with my buddies to Montgomery to do this wrestling show down there that I would meet another guy that does comedy and then end up doing a podcast with him and then end up talking to someone who he does comedy with and now do a podcast with
Yeah,
you and somebody will see this podcast and they'll reach out and
they
so on
will,
and so
and it just
forth and
like
that's
keeps going. And
yeah.
I think it just like helps every day feel easier. I know that's so cheesy, but just like waking up and being like, okay, I can still like keep growing this thing and watching like comedy unfold. Like I feel like it's given me just like such a purpose and meaning that I feel
Yeah.
just like deeply satisfied in my days. I don't know.
And I mean, and you realize that like, okay, you have people in your circle that are doing the same things and going through the same things, but like for me, it's interesting and cool to me to be like, oh, okay, well, there's people all over the place who are doing the same
Yes.
thing. They're just trying to get somewhere. They're just trying to make a way for themselves, and like just to provide a way for that to maybe have a little further reach and somebody's gonna watch this podcast either because they know me and my 6 podcasts I do, and now they're gonna learn who you are and they're gonna look into you, or they're gonna watch this podcast because they know you and they know me, and maybe they'll watch some more of
Yeah,
my podcast. Maybe they'll book me to do comedy sometime. Maybe they'll look into all my wrestling nonsense and want to do something with that. But either way, if any of that happens, then hey, we haven't wasted an hour. And if none of it
for
happens, then
sure.
I enjoyed the conversation. So
Exactly.
it's all good.
Like all around, it's a good time. Yeah.
So speaking of that, and I forgot to do this with Fombi. I get
Uh
carried
huh.
away and get to talking, I forget. So while I'm thinking of it right now, based on what we were just saying, do you have any social media accounts you want to plug? Anything that you want people to know they can reach out to you and find out about your shows coming up? Anything like that?
Yes. So my Instagram at Jokes by Nico is going to be the best way to keep up with what I'm doing. I post my flyers there, and then I also have my link tree, which links to like my TikTok that I've been using too much, and like my Facebook and all of my upcoming shows. So yeah, Jokes by Nico.
Well, there you go. Check it out. Go check out Jokes by Nico. And I really appreciate you doing this. It's been a great talk to you, and hope to have you back again sometime. And when you do, hopefully you don't have a story about how you booked somebody that you had a ton of faith in and it just didn't go well. Hopefully you can come back and be like, no, Gene, I'm still killing it. Like
It's still
everybody's
going
doing
well.
great.
This has been so fun. I appreciate you having me, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and good luck with your shows. And who knows, maybe I'll see you at a wrestling show in Montgomery, or one of these days I can come down and do some comedy with you. We'll see how
Sounds
it goes.
good. All
All
right.
right. Thanks, Nico.
Yay.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Bye. All right, there we go. Another fun comedy podcast. Nico is very cool, and like I said, it's so great to get to talk to other people in comedy and find out that hey, they're just out there doing their thing, making their way just like everybody is. And so I'm going to keep doing these. So if you're watching this, if you're a comedian or a producer or whatever you do related to comedy, hit me up, genejackson95 at gmail.com or on Facebook, and we'll work it out. We'll get you on here, and we'll have a conversation about comedy. And hey, I'll have networked with someone else. So, thanks for watching, and keep looking for when the next show comes out. It'll be real soon. Thanks.